Chapter 16. In the middle of March, Bud's fraternity gave a costume dance, an annual affair for which the girls were required to make their own costumes. They were given 1 square yard of bright-colored cotton for that purpose, and the one who returned the largest piece of unused cloth won first prize. Some used the whole cloth out of necessity, some out of modesty, and some used as little as they dared. Emmy used as little as she dared. She achieved a sort of bikini effect much admired by the men and frowned upon by the conservative element in Alpha Beta, headed by Mary Lou. Before she went out, Emmy modeled her creation in the upstairs hall. "Emmy, I think that's a little bear," said Mary Lou. "Oh, heck, Mary Lou, there'll be a dozen others just like it." "Well, I know, but it's awfully revealing." The girls laughed at her and said, "Oh, they all wear 'em now, Mary Lou." "I think she looks great." "Emmy, if you don't win first prize, nobody can." "Just don't sneeze," said Beth. The buzzer sounded and Emmy said, "Oh, there's Bud," and scampered down the stairs. Laura watched her go a little spitefully. The thought that Emmy had brought Charlie and Beth together again still rankled inside her. Her sense told her it would have happened anyway. Her heart told her it was Emmy's fault. She said to Beth, "Emmy has a pretty figure, doesn't she?" "Oh, Emmy has a beautiful figure." That was enough to make Laura hate it. She was even jealous of Emmy. Emmy and Beth were such good friends. Emmy was so pretty, Laura so plain. When Beth and Emmy laughed or talked to each other, she found it irritating in the extreme, and yet she knew nothing could be less likely than erotic intimacies between them, and during the span of quiet, rational daytime hours, she calmed herself, combed out her snarled affections, and sprayed them with logic so they might last smoothly through the evening. After Emmy went out, Mary Lou came in to talk to Beth. "Hi, Mrs. Mitchell-Grogan," said Beth with a grin. "When are you going out?" Laura looked up from the couch, and Mary Lou laughed and said, "Oh, Mitch is coming over around 8. Say, Beth," she grew suddenly serious, "did you talk to Emmy?" Beth felt a guilty pang shoot through her. "Why? Is something wrong?" "Well, no, not really, but I just don't like it when she wears such a revealing costume to a big dance. I didn't know it was going to be that bear, or I would have told her myself." "None of us saw it before tonight, Mary Lou. In fact, she finished it only this afternoon." "Well, I didn't see it till just now, or I'd have stopped her. But what can you do?" She wrinkled her brow and sighed. Bud came, and she was all ready to go out. Everybody stands around approving, and it's the night of the party. I can't order her not to wear the thing, but I wish she'd use her head. I've been worried about her for months. It made Beth feel rather nervously defensive. "She's been behaving herself," she said. "She doesn't act up in public." "Oh, Beth, I've seen her so full of beer at parties. That's just a big act, Mary Lou. Most of it." "Well, not all of it. I've seen her drink the beer." "She doesn't drink too much, just likes a good time." "I'll say she likes a good time. Remember that afternoon at Maxie's when she was kissing Bud?" "Oh, hell, everybody kisses everybody at Maxie's." "Yes, but not up on the bandstand, and not like Bud was kissing Emmy." "Oh, Mary Lou, don't worry about her. You'd be surprised how sensible she can be." "I certainly would." Beth laughed and said, "Oh, come on. Don't worry. I'll answer for her." "Okay, if you'll talk to her again. If you don't, I will." "I will, Mary Lou." Bud was a party boy, and Beth knew it. He liked to whoop it up, and he expected Emmy to keep up with him. He expected, in fact, quite a lot of Emmy, and Emmy wouldn't disappoint him. But she tried to make him play the game her way. He had to stay within certain bounds, and the bounds were simply discretion, meaning privacy. Unfortunately, the bounds became hazy, and Bud began to step over them now and again. Bud and Emmy hadn't gone to the dance directly, it turned out. They went to a party where beer flowed, spirits rose, and time wandered by unmarked. At midnight, someone shouted, "My God, the dance!" They scrambled out and into their cars and made it over to the house 5 minutes before the orchestra packed up to leave. They were welcomed with a cheer, and the girls surrendered their leftover costume material to a committee of judges, which, after a 30-second squabble, gallantly pronounced Emily the winner. Amidst the uproar following, Bud picked Emmy up by the waist and lifted her over his head. Flashbulbs flowered around them. He let her down again, and she was giggling helplessly, clinging to him for support. "Hey, pick her up again," someone shouted. "Nielsen, hey boy, you hear me? Pick her up again." "No," said Emily, clutching Bud. "Hey, we want another picture. Once more. Come on, Emmy." "No. Emmy, you're a chicken." "Hey, come on, Em," Bud said. "It won't hurt you." "No, I won't do it. I don't want them to take pictures." Bud dug his fingers into her ribs, and she screamed and laughed, wriggling to be free. With a wretched disregard for discretion, the top of her costume suddenly split open, and the evening took an unexpected, Saturnalian turn. Emmy gasped and covered her dazzling front with her arms and whirled to face Bud, who was laughing as he had never laughed before. He took her in his arms, and the general hilarity got them both. Everyone shouted at Emmy to turn around again, and somebody finally rescued her with a leather jacket tossed over the heads of the crowd. The others booed the rescuer. Bud reached out and caught the sailing jacket, and Emily cried, "Oh, Bud, don't let me go," and everybody cheered. When she had the things safely on, she went to the powder room and got her coat and wrapped herself securely in thick gray wool. She was indisputably the queen of the evening, and in spite of her embarrassment, she was so roundly and good-naturedly flattered that the accident didn't seem like quite such a calamity. Several of the girls who convoyed her to and from the powder room were alpha betas. They were laughing because the atmosphere of laughter was irresistible, but they knew, and Emmy knew, that there would be trouble. "Well," said Emmy, "I certainly didn't do it on purpose. Nobody could say that." "I hate to think what Mary Lou's going to say," said one of the alpha betas. "We can't possibly keep it a secret. Everybody will be talking about it." Emmy said in alarm, "Do you think they got any pictures of it?" "Oh, my God, I hope not." "I don't think so," said another girl. "You turned around so fast. I don't think anybody had time." "Well, pictures or no, Em, you're going to have to explain it somehow." Emmy shrugged. "My costume broke, that's all. Heavens, it was double-stitched. I don't know how it could have happened." "Maybe you were sabotaged." "What?" "Maybe somebody cut the threads." Emmy laughed, but she disallowed the suggestion. She got home at closing hours and ran breathless up to the room. Beth was just undressing, and Laura was still up. Emmy came in laughing and threw herself down on the couch. Beth shut the door hastily and ran to her. "Emmy," she said, and Emmy laughed even harder. Beth had to laugh with her, while Laura remained disdainfully aloof. "Emmy, what happened? Tell me." Emmy sat up slowly and said theatrically, "Look," and unbuttoned her coat. Laura gasped, and Beth stared wide-eyed at her for a minute, and then she began to laugh. "Oh, Emmy," she exclaimed when she could catch her breath, "my God, it broke!" Laura watched their laughter, properly disapproving. Finally, Beth began to get serious. "Emmy, what happened?" she said. "Was it bad?" "Oh," Emmy slowed down a little. "It was just one of those things." She giggled again. "Bud was tickling me. Oh, guess what? I won first prize." Beth had to chuckle at her again. She threw her hands up and slapped her knees. "Emmy, you're impossible," she said. "Okay, now be serious. What happened?" "Well, it just ripped, that's all." "With how many people gaping at you?" I don't know. Oh, I grabbed it, of course. I turned right around and Bud held me so nobody could see. After everybody saw. Well, Beth, I couldn't help it, Emmy protested, laughing again. Oh, I was horribly embarrassed, but it was so funny. The door snapped open and Mary Lou bristled in. She shut the door after her and leaned on it. Emmy, she said, and paused, her face solemn. What happened? Emmy stood up, still smiling. Oh, it wasn't so awful, Mary Lou. It was just an accident. Well, I want to know just exactly what happened. Everybody's talking about it, Emmy. It'll be all over the campus by tomorrow. Now tell me. Her voice trembled with indignation, and she was pale in earnest. She found no humor in the situation at all. It was a social fiasco that reflected directly on the good name of Alpha Beta. Well, I won first prize for my costume, and everybody was sort of cheering and teasing me while they took pictures, and Bud tickled me, and I sort of jerked away from him, and the bra broke. That's all. I couldn't help it, Mary Lou. I didn't do it on purpose. They took pictures? Mary Lou looked stricken, and Beth watched her with a worried frown. Anybody could have pleaded Emmy's case better than Emmy pleaded it herself. Oh, they didn't take pictures of that. I mean, I'm sure they didn't. Oh, Mary Lou, don't look so grim. You frightened me. She laughed, but Mary Lou didn't even smile. Emmy, we're going to have a talk about this. You and me and Sarah and Bobby. They were the ranking house officers. Bobby was one of Emmy's good friends. Mary Lou, you act as if you thought I did this on purpose. I'd never do such a thing. The house is in for a lot of bad publicity about this, Emmy. We have to agree on something to say. The dean is going to want to see you, and so are the alumni. Emmy sobered up suddenly. Oh, no, she said. Do you really think so? But it was just an accident. Be in my room tomorrow morning at 9, said Mary Lou, and don't talk to anybody about it before then. Okay, said Emmy, and Mary Lou went out, leaving her honestly worried. Gee, Beth, Emmy said, turning anxious eyes on her. What'll they do to me? I don't know, Em. Depends on how it goes over on campus, I guess. Don't worry, Emmy. It wasn't your fault. Beth felt the weight of a new blame on her shoulders. She had failed both Emmy and Mary Lou. She could have warned Emmy to slow down if she'd only had the eyes to see how fast she was going, if she'd only remembered Mary Lou's warning. But she had been too engrossed in her strange little triangle. Emmy was outside that triangle, so Emmy's troubles didn't count. Nobody had troubles but Beth Cullison, and now Beth was ashamed of her selfishness. Beth wanted to go with Emmy to the meeting the next morning, but Mary Lou said no. So it was Mary Lou, Sarah, who was vice president, and Bobby, who was secretary, who faced Emmy that morning. Mary Lou, with her customary unbudging justice, and Sarah, who usually agreed with her, thought Emily and Bud should shake hands and call it quits. The dean had called and arranged a conference with Emily. The incident was in the town papers, and the campus was having a good laugh. The faculty and the alumni of Alpha Beta were furious. Emmy began to feel a little desperate. Can anyone possibly think I did it on purpose? She said. Look, Emmy, said Mary Lou, we know you didn't do it on purpose. That isn't the point. The point is that it happened, and it happened to you. And you were very drunk and very bare and in mixed company at the time. Nobody's saying you deliberately undressed in public, but if you'd been willing to wear a little more costume in the first place, this wouldn't have happened at all. And this came on top of 4 months of a pretty hot romance that everybody's been talking about. You just haven't been too careful, Emily. You just haven't cared very much about anything but yourself and Bud. But I have, Mary Lou. You've completely ignored your obligations to the university and the sorority. You've disgraced us all, and it could have been prevented. I don't see— Emmy was near tears. It could have, Emmy, if you hadn't insisted on being the barest girl at that party. If you hadn't gone out and gotten drunk. I wasn't the only one. If you hadn't let Bud to expect that he could treat you— she cast about for a word— promiscuously in public and get away with it. It wasn't promiscuous. He was just tickling me. I mean, heavens, it was just— She stopped, sensing that her own words did her a disservice. Well, just what kind of behavior do you think that is, Emmy? Proper? What do you think a man thinks of when he sees a girl squirming and wriggling in practically no clothes at all? I didn't ask him to tickle me, Mary Lou. Yes, you did, Emmy. Don't you see? For the past 4 months you've been letting him tickle you. You just never told him not to. You let him do it, and you let him know you like it. What more do you have to do for a man? Spell it for him? Emmy hung her head. Emily, said Mary Lou, and her voice grew kind again. I'm not trying to hurt you. Believe me, I'm not. I'm trying to do what I can for the sorority, and it, as a whole, is more important right now than the individual, because it's within the power of an individual to do the whole group a harm, to punish everybody for her one mistake. Well, we have to correct that mistake. We can't let everyone point at Alpha Beta and laugh because one Alpha Beta did something wrong. That one Alpha Beta has to correct the error. It's simple logic, and it's only fair. Emmy rubbed her head. Simple logic was the hardest kind for her. It always struck her as being inarguable and senseless at the same time. She was awed by it. Mary Lou sighed and ditched her cigarette. Emmy, it's up to you, she said. I don't want to impose any silly, useless detention on you. I don't even want to campus you. You'll see the dean. You'll talk it over. I know you'll be sensible about it. What can I do? Said Emmy. Well, Mary Lou looked around at the others and then sighed and looked back at Emily. Em, I know you're terribly fond of Bud. I guess that's been the cause of the difficulty, really. Emily nodded. It seemed as if Mary Lou was beginning to understand her now and wanted to help her. It gave her a false sense of security. And I know, too, how much affection you have for the sorority, for the university. Emmy nodded fervently again. Well, somehow the two just don't seem compatible. I know it's hard, Emmy. Emmy didn't get it at all for a minute. But I think we have to take a positive step right now. Undo the wrong, sort of. Oh, yes, I do too, said Emily, walking innocently, willingly into the trap. And I think you just have to make a choice. A choice? Yes, because if you keep on like this, Em, the university and the sorority are going to suffer. That's all there is to it. Oh, but Mary Lou, I won't keep on. I mean, the party's over. She couldn't believe they would be so harsh. She laughed a little apprehensively as the light began to dawn. Is it, Emmy? Mary Lou's bright, steady eyes heard her. Well, of course. Emmy, I think it might be a good idea, for all of us, and especially for you, if you didn't see Bud for a while. Emmy stared at her, speechless and appalled. But I love him, she whispered finally. I think that's exactly the trouble, Emmy. I think you either ought to leave school and marry the guy or not see him for a while. I think the temptation is just too great. She said it very kindly. But my parents would never let me leave school. My father has his heart set on my getting my degree, and Bud might not marry me. Brought face to face with the problem, she admitted it to herself for the first time. Then I think you ought not to see Bud for a while. Emmy was thunderstruck, trapped. For a while, she murmured in a hardly audible voice. Bobby put an arm around her and said, Don't cry. For a while, Mary Lou repeated. It's the only way, Emmy. I think you're headed straight for real trouble otherwise, and you're pulling all of us after you. Don't you see, Emmy? It's for everybody's good, really. It won't be forever. Emmy saw. She saw very clearly now. She tried to steady her breath. Oh, what if I do see him? She couldn't help asking. It was a last feeble gesture of independence. What if I keep on seeing him? It's your duty not to, Em. But what would happen if I did? It had the fascination of calamity for her. Well, Mary Lou looked down at her lap and found it hard to talk, hard to do what she cherished as her duty, to hit just the right tone, firm but compassionate. Then I think you would be happier outside the sorority. It took Emmy's breath away from her for a minute. You mean you'd jerk my pin? It was preposterous. You'd blackball me? Oh, Emmy, said Mary Lou, and she patted her arm sympathetically. It was hard to do the right thing, but this was indubitably the right thing. Emmy, don't say it that way. We wouldn't blackball you. I think we should just have a sort of agreement. If everything works out, you'll see Bud again. It just means time to think it over, time to get to know yourself. But you don't know Bud. Emmy put her head down in her hands. It might be love, all right, but with Bud she had to keep feeding the flame. She had to be with him every day, reminding him how pretty, how bright, and how sweet she was, or he would find someone else. It was that simple. That was logic. She looked up. The three girls were watching her, a jury of friendly executioners waiting for her answer. She knew they were all of the same mind, Mary Lou's mind. Even Bobby, who gave her a squeeze and said, "Emmy, I think it might be a good idea." Emily leaned against her and wept for a few minutes. The sorority had her in a corner. There was no help for her. At last she whispered, "All right," and got up and hurried from the room. Chapter 17. Beth was warmly sympathetic in spite of her misgivings about Bud. She was needled by a sense of guilt and the thought of her own adventures with Charlie. She said over and over, "Emmy, I should have warned you. I should have seen it coming. It's my fault, Em." But Emmy wouldn't have it that way. "They're such damn hypocrites," Beth fumed. "They know you aren't the only one who's made a few concessions. My God, they do it themselves, a lot of them. It's just that the one who gets caught gets punished. You were just too much in love to be very cautious, I guess. I guess you really are in love, Emmy, aren't you?" Emmy's tears answered her. "Damn," Beth muttered. "They really cash in on that prestige of theirs, don't they? They know there's no disgrace quite so humiliating as getting blackballed out of the sorority. The whole campus talks about you for months. Suddenly you haven't any friends. Why? Because you left them all back in the sorority, and you've left the sorority for good. And then what happens? You can't stand it after a while. You're an outcast, a failure. You're nowhere socially. You're ashamed and lonesome, and pretty soon you call it quits and leave school. Maybe you go somewhere else. Maybe you don't. But all over the country, on any campus, that sorority blackball will haunt you every time you try to join a club. They'll find out about it, and there you'll be, right back where you started. God, it makes me sick." Bud exploded when he found out what had happened. He was furious, frustrated, bitter against the powers that be in universities and sororities. He cut his classes for a week and spent all his time filled to his ears with beer in Maxie's basement. He played till his lip gave out, and he complained to anyone who would listen to him. It was his way of handling a problem. Bud could make sweet music and sweet girls. He could be supremely pleasant with anybody, anywhere, but he couldn't make or follow a plan, and order and progress were hostile to his happiness. He was artist enough to admire ideals, but he never pursued them. However, they took Emily away from him at just the time when he had decided that she was one of his ideals, and the sudden loss made her more desirable, not less, as Emily had feared. "I love that girl," he muttered moodily. "The only girl I ever loved. And what do? They take her away from me." Charlie swatted him on the back. "Cheer up, boy," he said. "This won't last forever. You'll be seeing her. Beth says they'll parole her for good behavior." Charlie had heard the story a dozen times. "Yeah, sure. When? What the hell am I supposed to do in the meantime? I tell you, Ayers, I'm going nuts. I can't stand it. Who the hell do they think they are? Who the hell? Okay, boy, take it easy. Yeah, take it easy. You gotta help me out. What am I gonna do? Help me out, boy." Charlie gave him a lot of free advice. Beth complained to Charlie, too. "It's a damn dirty trick," she said. "God, it makes me mad. There's only one aspect of the whole thing that might do any good, and that's that Bud was never meant for Emmy. Or any girl, for that matter. He couldn't support a wife or kids. My God, can you imagine Bud Nielsen with kids on his hands? He'd give 'em all slide whistles before they could walk and send 'em out to make their own living." Charlie laughed at her. "No one's fonder of Emmy than I am," she added, "but she'll do anything for a man she thinks she's in love with. She hasn't the sense she was born with. She'd never get caught if she'd use her head, but she wants to please Bud. Will she say no to Bud? No, she will not. And do they catch her in bed with him? No, they do not. That's too easy. Her damn silly costume breaks, and all of a sudden she's a scarlet woman. An accident. God, it's ironic, isn't it?" Charlie nodded. "Well, maybe they'll cool off now. See Bud for what he is." "What is he, honey? You're pretty damn hard on him. Oh, Bud Nielsen is a bum. A born bum, let's face it. A bum? I don't know, Beth. He's a nice guy. Sure, he's a nice guy. He's a great guy. Everybody likes him, and he'll never amount to a row of beans. Well, I don't know. Bud was a good friend of Charlie's. Oh, Charlie, he's been an undergraduate for 6 years. The guy hasn't even enough ambition to leave school, for God's sake. Emmy's as much in love with that trombone as she is with Bud. He's a big wheel on campus. Talented. Everybody knows him. I'd never tell her, but I'm kind of glad they'll be separated for a while. I think they'll both come to their senses. I hope they will. Charlie disagreed. Hell, if they took you away from me for a while, would you come to your senses? Would I? No, but we're in love. Well, so are they. They just think they are. You just can't resist analyzing everybody you know, can you? No matter how little you really know about them. You figure them all out and slap a label on them, and that's the end of them as far as you're concerned. You never consider that you might be wrong or they might be different. Try analyzing yourself sometime. It's no cinch. Beth was temporarily confused. Well, I know Emmy pretty well, she said. Yeah, and I know Bud. He may be a worthless character, but tearing him away from Emmy isn't going to cool either of them off. That's the best way I can think of to get them both hot. Right now, Bud's in love with Emmy, and he's damned unhappy. I feel sorry for the guy. Oh, so do I. It's not that I don't. It's just that all men are such. Most men are such. Oh, never mind. He grinned at her. What are most women? You'd never understand. What's Beth Cullison? His eyes were curiously bright and narrow, and Beth felt suddenly uncomfortable. You tell me, she challenged him. I can't, he said. I don't know. I thought you did. She couldn't look at his eyes, and she despised her sudden shyness. Maybe we'll find out together, he said with a light smile. And so the days went slowly by, with everybody bringing news to Emmy about Bud, with everybody discussing the situation over and over again. Emily chafed and wept and wondered and beseeched her friends for more news. Bud griped and argued with anyone who would listen and consoled himself with beer and music. It got pretty bad. He liked to talk to Charlie because Charlie was a fraternity brother and Charlie saw Beth, Emmy's roommate. Charlie was a friend. He listened. I tell you, Dad, it's intolerable, Bud protested. If I could just see her, just once. The thing is, nobody'd have to know. If I could just talk to her, work it out somehow. They won't let you talk to her. If I could meet her someplace. Hang on, boy, that's not going to kill you. They'll relent one of these days. Yeah, sure, I can hang on, but what I mean is, why hang on if you don't have to? Hell, this is a big campus, 19,000 students. Who's going to check on each one? If I saw her some afternoon where nobody'd suspect anything, yeah, but you have to worry about where. Why don't you just forget it and let the thing ride for a few weeks? They'll give in. Emmy's acting like a damn Puritan. They'll have to let her out. Bud was quiet for a minute, and then he looked at Charlie with an intently confidential frown. Charlie, he said, listen, is there any time during the day when your apartment is empty? No, said Charlie firmly. Listen, boy, no, it's never empty. We have a resident truant officer. Charlie, listen, it'd be so easy. Nobody'd ever know, believe me. No. Now listen to me, will ya? God damn it, now listen. Look, Emmy has a 2 o'clock Tuesdays and Thursdays. She's out at 3, walks south on Wright Street. Listen, Bud, Charlie, you've even got a car. My God, this is perfect. You could pick her up, tell her about it in the car on the way over. Way over where? To the apartment, boy. Bud flung his hands out earnestly. Use your head. Jesus. Now listen, when's your roommate in class? Oh, what's his name? Mitch. Mitch. He there on Thursday afternoon? Look, Bud, that's beside the... That's great. That makes it just about perfect. He wouldn't have to know a thing. Nobody'd know but you and me and Emmy. The fewer the better. Charlie, my boy, listen to me. We'd be there only a couple of hours. He watched Charlie's face anxiously. All right, an hour. Charlie was silent, sympathetic but dubious. Charlie, you hear me? Yeah. I don't know, Bud. Man, what's the matter with you? You so pure you never had a girl in your apartment? No, but I was never under orders not to have her, boy. I was never shadowed by the university. If you get caught, we all get canned. The university doesn't sponsor extracurricular lovemaking, in case you didn't know. Look, Charlie, if we get caught, which we won't, nobody gets canned but us, Emmy and me. Are you ready to do that to Emmy? It won't happen, believe me. Besides, if it did, we'd go on pro. We wouldn't be expelled. Who wants to be on probation? Charlie, we're just wasting time talking about it. It won't happen, man. It's my apartment, my car, my bed, for God's sake. Okay, and I'm your friend, a brother. I could have asked to use the apartment without telling you why. You can make like you're shocked as all hell if we get caught. Oh, hell, this is a lot of crap. We're not going to get caught. Who's going to catch us? When does Mitch get in? Oh, about 5:30. Any sooner? Ever getting sooner? No. Charlie shook his head. Okay, we're out at 5. Emmy walks 1 block to the bus. I go the other way toward campus. Charlie shook his head doubtfully. Bud, I hate to risk it, boy. Not because I'm afraid for my own sake, but God, it would be the end for Emmy if she got caught. Charlie, said Bud, as if he were talking to an uncooperative first grader, we won't get caught. Who the hell's going to catch us? As long as I don't have to call her, as long as you pick her up and everything, what's to go wrong? Oh, Charlie, be a friend. I need help, believe me. How would you like it if they cut you off for months? And don't tell me there's other girls. I know that. I know. I want Emmy, like you want Beth. I want Emmy. Charlie, I'd do it for you. I swear I would, boy. Charlie drained his beer and stabbed his cigarette into an ashtray. You really want to see her that bad, he said. Bud looked up at the ceiling as if searching it for his self-control. Yeah, I want to, he said. That bad. Okay, I'll pick her up. Thursday at 3. Charlie, Bud grinned at him and gripped his hand. Be at the apartment, and by God be out at 5. I will. Jesus, Charlie, I can't tell you. Never mind, boy. Save it. Just keep it quiet. My God, you're telling me. At 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, Emily stood on the steps of Bevier Hall on Wright Street, chattering with some classmates. Charlie didn't see her until she came down the walk with a friend, and then he pulled the car toward her and called to her. Emmy, he said. Hey, Em, how about a ride? She looked up, surprised, and broke into a sudden smile. Thanks, she exclaimed, running over. Can you take Jane, too? Charlie was alarmed. Oh, where's she going? Gamma Delta House. The girl thrust a pleasant young face over Emmy's shoulder. Okay, hop in, said Charlie. It's right on the way. I hope you don't mind, Emmy said, sensing his reserve. Not at all. He had little to say until Jane was delivered, and they were a mile off course from the apartment. He turned the car around while Emily watched him with big, questioning eyes. Where are we going? She asked. We're going to my apartment, Emily, he said. Your apartment? Yeah. He looked at her and said with a smile, Bud's there. Emily gasped, and then she cried. Emily, he said, my God, don't tell me you don't want to go. Yes, I do, she said, I do. You scared me, Charlie. Oh, is he really there? She put a hand on his arm. Yeah, he's there all right. Charlie, it's safe, isn't it? I mean, we won't get caught. No, Em, don't worry. Mitch is out for the afternoon. I won't be there. You'll have till 5 o'clock. Oh, said Emily with an uncertain smile. Charlie, thanks. Don't thank me, honey. I wasn't very nice about it. I don't want you to get into trouble. But I guess there's not much chance of that. But, Emmy, yes? Her heart gave a thump. Don't tell anyone about it. Not anyone. Not even Beth, understand? Yes. Not even Beth? Not even Beth. Promise? Yes, she whispered. Charlie dropped her off. She walked up to the door with her knees shaking a little, opened it, and went in. For a moment her sun-dazzled eyes saw nothing, and then she heard Bud jump to his feet. Emmy, he said. He pushed the door shut behind her and held her against it, leaning on her and kissing her almost savagely. He pulled her against him and said, Oh, Emmy, oh, God, 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 Emmy, darling. He could not have said more or said it better. He looked at her as if they were all miraculously new to him. He pulled her down and took her like a man who had never had a woman before and thought never to have another. He took her over and over and over, and yet again in a fight with time that raised his passion to a frenetic pitch and made a wild, tireless thing of Emily. And then they lay beside each other, whispered to each other of love and loneliness and relentless longing. Bud wrapped her in his arms, still lightheaded with emotion, and said, "Emmy, darling, I love you." "Oh, Bud," she half sobbed, "they'll never do this to us again." "Never," he echoed. "Oh, Em, I'd do anything for you. I love you, chicken." She clung to him hopefully. "Anything, Bud?" "Anything," he murmured, kissing her. "They'll never take you away from me again." "Bud," her voice was light and supplicating, "marry me?" "What?" He stopped kissing her just long enough to raise himself on one elbow and gaze at her. "Marry you?" She held her breath, not daring to answer, nor yet to keep still, and her perishable perfection ensnared him, inflamed him, wrenched his heart like a lovely tune. "Yes, Em, I guess I would. I never thought of it, but I guess I would. I will if you want it, Emmy. I'd be one hell of a lousy husband, but I love you. Maybe that'll make up for it." "Oh, Bud," she cried softly. They leaned toward each other until their lips were together again, and far away, as in the gentlest of reveries, the latch clicked and the door opened. They lay, quiet and complete, whole and serene in each other's need, fulfilled and reassured, lovely and beautifully human. "Emily?" A poison-tipped voice split them asunder. A girl's voice, high and hard with indignation. "Oh, my God!" cried a boy at almost the same time. "Oh, my God!" he said again helplessly. Bud and Emmy sat up suddenly in a fit of alarm, gazing at the silhouettes, straining against the head-on sun streaming at them from the window to see their faces. "I'm terribly sorry," said the boy. "I didn't know. God, we'd better go, Mary Lou." "We'd better go, Emily," said Mary Lou. "You and I." Bud looked at his watch. "But it's only 4:30, he said. Beth found Amy just before dinner, face down on the couch and sobbing. The shades were all pulled down, and the room was dark and sad and overheated. Laura followed Beth into the room and stood soundless and motionless while Beth dropped her books and shut the door. "Emmy," Beth said, "what's the matter?" She threw her coat off and sank to the floor on her knees by Emily's head. Emily turned away. "Emmy, honey," she said, and stroked her hair. Laura watched her without expression. "Tell me what's the matter." Emily tried to repress her tears. She turned to Beth and whispered sporadically, "They found us, Mary Lou and Mitch. We couldn't stand it any longer. We had to see each other. They found us." Beth was astounded. "You saw Bud?" she said, squinting incredulously. "Yes," said Emmy in a tiny voice. "Emmy, where? How?" Beth felt the impending catastrophe. "The apartment. I didn't know. Charlie picked me up. I never thought we'd get caught." "Charlie? Charlie's apartment?" "Yes. He told Bud he could use it. Nobody was going to be there. It was just a mistake. You met Bud in Charlie's apartment?" "Yes." Her voice tricked and trapped and deserted her. Her breath came hard and then not at all. "Oh, Em." Beth put her arms around her and comforted her. Laura watched them, cold and remote as a winter sky, silent as the snow. "Tell me about it." Emmy pulled herself up and sat gazing at the dead face of the window shade behind the desk. "Mitch wasn't supposed to get in till 5:30. He cut class. He had coffee with Mary Lou. They came back to the apartment to get some books. We would have left in another 15 minutes, but they caught us. I'll be blackballed, Beth." She looked desperately at her. The dinner chime sounded, and Beth remembered Laura. "Run along and eat, honey," she said. Laura stood stolidly in place. There were times when she actively resented the childish role Beth forced on her. "Go on," Beth said. "I'll be along in a minute." Laura stayed where she was, and Beth turned to Emily again. "Can I bring you a tray, Em?" Emmy shook her head. "I can't eat," she said, leaning limply on Beth's shoulder. "They're going to kick me out, Beth." "How bad? What were you doing when they came in?" "We were in bed. We were in Charlie's bed." Laura shuddered with a sharp, involuntary disgust. We were making love. Oh, Beth, Emmy wept. I love him so much. Is it such a terrible crime to love somebody? No, said Beth, with a sting in her voice, but it's a terrible thing to get caught. It's good to love, Emmy, but it's hell to get caught. I'd just love to know, she went on, with her voice getting surer and harder, just what the hell Mary Lou and Mitch were doing going to the apartment this afternoon. Going to do a little intimate homework, maybe? A little research? Anatomical variety? We'll never know. She rocked Emily in her arms, and Laura, seeing their bodies move together, could feel nothing but spite for Emily. Laura held her tongue until late that night, after Emmy had gone to bed. What will they do to her? She asked. Kick her out, jerk her pin, disgrace her. She spat the words out. Well, Laura studied her nails. I guess she disgraced them. Beth looked at her narrowly. She fell in love, Laura. Is that so disgraceful to you? I didn't mean it that way, Beth, Laura said softly. I only meant she didn't have to be so obvious about it. Everybody knew she loved him. That's good enough reason to expel her, isn't it? Laura sighed ill-naturedly. She got what she deserved, she said. She broke every rule. She defied authority. Laura, said Beth with pointed irritation, what do you think would happen to you if everybody knew you were in love with me? You'd get the same treatment, honey, and don't forget it. You'd get worse. Laura stared at her, startled and scared. What's so wonderful about rules? Beth snapped. Is it obeying the rules for two girls to make love to each other? Don't you think we're defying authority ourselves? I never thought of it that way, Laura faltered. No, of course not. Maybe you never thought of it at all. Beth, for heaven's sake, Emily was caught in bed with a man with no clothes on when she wasn't supposed to see him at all. She was making love to him. Beth came over to the couch and sat down beside Laura, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, a cigarette in one hand. She pulled on her cigarette and brought 2 jets of smoke through her nose. We've made love, Laura. But that's different, Beth. That's clean. It's beautiful. She grasped Beth's arm and leaned anxiously toward her. Beth studied the tip of her cigarette. A man and a woman are beautiful too, and we've been caught making love, Laura, you and I, just like Bud and Emmy. Laura snatched her hand away as if from a flame and sat for a wounded moment, terrified. Beth, what do you mean? She said in a strained whisper. Beth flicked her ashes thoughtlessly toward a tray. Just that. We aren't any cleaner or any more beautiful than Emily and Bud, just because we're both women, and we were caught, too. Beth! Laura stared at her with horrified eyes. We were never caught. Yes, we were, Laura. We were seen in here one night, right here in this room, kissing each other and talking about it. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't they ever say anything? They don't know. We had the good luck to get caught by Emmy. Emmy? Yes, Emmy. Emmy found us in here one night, just before semester vacation. She heard enough to guess the story. She never told a soul except me. She never will. Beth's quiet, angry voice contrasted vividly with Laura's high anxiety. To Laura, her love had seemed as secret as it was sacred. That someone else should know, that someone else had known for months, that the someone else was Emily, and Emily would never tell, would spare them what had been inflicted on her. All these thoughts struck Laura at once, and she felt a sudden twist of guilt in her heart. Oh, Beth, if I'd only known, she said, and her voice broke. Oh, it would only have worried you, Laura. I hoped you could see some good in Emmy. I hoped you'd learn to like her. She looked up at Laura's face. I guess you were jealous of her. Beth! Laura rested her forehead against Beth's shoulder. Beth, I'm so sorry. I thought she was... Oh, I don't know why she didn't just tell them about me. I was so nasty to her. I couldn't have blamed her if she did. She's not that way, Laura. Besides, if she told them about you, she'd have to tell them about me. She fingered her cigarette, musing. But she wouldn't have said anything anyway. She likes you, Laura, or at least she wants to. I don't know why." "Oh, Beth, I'm so sorry." "Don't tell me, Lore. Tell Emmy." Beth wasn't cross with her anymore. She was too worried about Emily to think about other feelings. "Don't cry, Lore." She turned and held her then and chided her gently. "I've had all I can stand of crying today." Laura stopped slowly, in jerks. "Will they really blackball her, Beth?" she whispered. "They have to. You can break the rules, but you can't get caught." "Isn't there anything we can do?" "All we can do is remind them of what they're going to do to Emmy. Her family, her education, her friends. All the heartbreak, and things never patch up to be quite the same as they were before." "Never?" "Oh, those things get all over your hometown. There's always somebody around to let them out. And once it's out, they never let you forget it." "Will they kick her out of school, too?" "They'll probably just put her on social probation, but she won't want to stay in school. My God, when the whole damn campus knows what happened." Beth knew what she was talking about. In no time at all there was the secret chapter meeting of the sorority, with one of the national officers in attendance. Representatives of the alumni were there too. Mary Lou was pale and distressed, and she let the alumni carry the burden of the meeting. They were impressive women, businesslike and efficient, real club women. They enjoyed tackling problems. Emmy's was one of the juiciest in years. They spent a good bit of time congratulating the girls present on their presumed virginity and their unblemished reputations, and a good bit demolishing what was left of Emmy's. They did it with masterful tact. "Emmy is a good girl at heart, but of course you all feel terrible about this. I know she had many friends in the house." But an hour and a half later, Emily was an ex-alpha beta. Her career at the university was ruined. Emmy was spared the meeting. She sat alone in her room while it was going on, with a number of open suitcases around her, and tried to find the courage to start packing. Beth had stood up at the meeting and made an eloquent plea for her, and when that failed, she got sharp and sarcastic, and still it didn't change the vote. The sisters were sympathetic, but restrained from mercy by the stifling good sense of their elders. Laura sat in wretched silence, helpless. She couldn't speak as well as Beth. She hadn't nearly the influence, and yet she wanted to stand up and say something. But after Beth sat down, there was nothing more to be said. Beth and Laura went up to the room together. Emmy had one bag packed when they came in. She sat on the floor staring listlessly at her belongings, and she looked up at them when they came in. Their faces were painful to see. "I know," she said. "I've called home. Dad's going to pick me up tomorrow." Beth went to her and said, "We did everything we could, Em." "I know. I knew it would happen. It had to happen, that's all. It couldn't be any other way. I was a fool." "Did you talk to Bud? They said you could call him." Emmy gave a bitter little smile. "Now that the damage is done, I can call him. If they'd let me talk to him before, maybe it wouldn't have happened." "Did you talk to him?" "Yes. I called while you were all downstairs." "What'd he say?" "Oh, you know Bud. He feels terrible. He was furious, but he doesn't know what to do. He never could handle a problem." Her smile became reluctantly tender. "He just rants and raves and says he'll quit school too, as if that would do any good. And they can't do this to me. And, oh, I don't know." She looked at Beth sadly. "Come on, Emmy," Beth said gently. "I'll help you get your things together. You don't have to go right away. You can take a few days to pack," and she stopped. "I want to get out of here as fast as I can," Emmy said harshly. "Oh, Beth, he cried," she said with a sudden hard sob. "My dad cried." And the stress of that sorrow nearly tore her apart. Beth got Emily packed by 3 in the morning. Laura had tried to help, but soon realized that she was neither needed nor wanted, and left for the dormitory. Emily was afraid to face anybody, and Beth sat up with her all night and helped her get ready to meet Bud for breakfast so they could say goodbye. He promised to go to see her every weekend. He swore he loved her. He denounced the university, the sorority, the world for his mistake. He said, "Emmy, darling, I did this to you, and I'll make it up to you somehow. By God, I will. I don't know how, but there must be a way. Oh, honey, I hate to see you so unhappy. And I did it. I did it. He was so miserable that Emily had to comfort him, and it seemed to give her strength. She listened to him, knowing that he sincerely meant what he said when he said it, wondering how long it would affect him so. Emmy, he said, I love you. If only there was something I could do. There is, she said, nervously determined. Don't you remember? He looked at her in puzzlement. Marry me, Bud, she said. He dropped his glance and stared at the table for a minute, and then he took her hands and nearly crushed them in his. I will, Em, he said. If that's what you want, I will. He looked up at her. Oh, Bud, she said, and began to smile, a real smile for the first time since their disaster. If I could know that, if I could look forward to that. He kissed her hands. When? She urged him. He shook his head. I don't know. And seeing her face cloud over again, he added, June, maybe, or Easter. I don't know. Oh, Bud, darling, she whispered, and the world steadied a little. Chapter 18. Beth brooded for days. She didn't want to see Charlie. She didn't want to go out. She didn't want to do anything. Her every bitter thought had a wicked stinger in it. She and Charlie had done the same as Emily and Bud and got away with it. Beth felt a wave of irresistible disgust with herself, her little duplicities, her evasions. In a restless temper, she got up and paced the room fretfully. Laura watched her anxiously, wanting to talk to her, to help, but afraid to. Beth pulled the window open and stood in the wash of early April air, chill and dark and soft, and thought of the sorrows that a man can heap on a woman. She thought of Charlie's complicity. She thought of Bud's worthless charm and useless contrition, and she hated them briefly, with violent energy. The phone on the desk rang. Laura picked it up, watching Beth all the while. Hello, she said, and she frowned. Beth shook her head without a word, and then shut her eyes tight as if they might eliminate the sound of Laura's voice. No, Charlie, she's not here. I'm sorry. Please, Charlie, I don't know, but... And she listened a moment longer and hung up. She looked at Beth apologetically. I hung up on him, she said. I didn't know what else to do. He sounded sort of frantic. I didn't know what else to do. She watched Beth hopefully, tenderly, afraid to go near her. Beth leaned against her dresser and stared out the window again, silent. Beth, Laura said softly. Beth turned toward her suddenly and pulled her hard and close against her and put her head down against Laura's. Her hot hands probed and pushed back and forth across Laura's shoulders, the small of her back, her hips, catching in her clothes, rumpling them, and finally her arms tightened around the younger girl and she whispered, Laura, look at me. Laura looked up and Beth kissed her full on the lips, a yearning kiss, warm and deep and slow. She didn't stop for a long while, not until Laura was shivering wildly in her embrace, answering Beth's passion with her own. Oh, Laura, Beth said into Laura's ear, what a fool I am, what a simpleton. Beth, I love you, said Laura, clinging to her and letting the delicious tremors shake her body, wondering where this revival of desire came from, but not caring. It had happened. Beth wanted her again the way she had in the beginning. Laura, Beth said, oh, I hate them. God damn them all, I hate them. Laura didn't have to be told that they were men. She knew it, and her heart expanded joyously and floated in her chest. You can't trust them, Beth muttered. You can't trust them. God, I don't know why I ever bothered with them. All they know how to do is hurt. They all want the same damn thing. She hugged Laura tighter, and Laura's hope bloomed again like a forced flower. I'm sick and tired of it, Beth went on. I'm sick and tired of the whole thing. If you get caught, they treat you like a slut. They kick you out. If you don't get caught, your conscience gives you hell. I've had enough, Laura. It makes me sick, the whole damn business. Authority, stupid, stuffy, blind authority. Men, deans, school, everything. I want to get out of here. They whipped Emmy in public, she thought. I'll whip myself in private. exile myself. It was the only way to square with her conscience. What about Charlie? Laura's voice was faint and frightened. Charlie can go to hell. Charlie's as guilty as Bud. You don't know how guilty Charlie is. You don't know. She put her head down again. Beth, would you really leave school? Yes, I would, damn it, I would. Will you let me come with you? Beth pulled away from her a little and started to shake her head. Beth, Laura cried, I want to go wherever you go. You said we weren't any better than Bud and Emily. You said we were doing the same thing. Well, we haven't any more right to stay here than she does then. Your family, Beth said. Oh, my family, Laura said, making the word curdle with her contempt. My family doesn't care what happens to me, just so they have something to tell their friends. They won't like it, Laura. I won't ask them to like it. There's nothing they can do about it, Beth. I'm of age, in this state anyway. Oh, Beth, you can't ask me to stay here without you. You can't. She clung tightly to her. Laura was aware that Beth couldn't resist her at that moment, and she made the most of it. Furious with men and intensely sympathetic for a girl, angry with herself yet in need of reassurance, Beth turned to Laura again with all the unreasoning joy of their early romance. She said weakly, I don't know. Laura said quickly, Beth, darling, I wouldn't be afraid of anything as long as you were with me. Beth laughed gently at her, flattered, seeing the exaggeration and yet enjoying it too much to deny it. I can't do everything, she whispered. Yes, you can, said Laura positively. Beth looked down at her with a spellbound smile. Laura, she said, with her lips against Laura's cheek, drifting over her face toward her lips, I love you. Laura's arms tightened about her and brought her desire hot to the surface. Beth pulled her over to the couch and down beside her. Suddenly, unexpectedly, completely, Laura had Beth again. Whatever the sorcery that won her, it was potent and it lasted. A week passed, and they made plans in secret to leave the house. Every night, in defiance of chance, they slept together in the room, and strangely enough, nobody noticed. Nobody barged in on them. Nobody suspected anything. Beth laughed at their luck. Wouldn't you know, she said, we might as well be kicked out as leave by ourselves. Might even be more honorable. But as long as we don't give a damn, we're perfectly safe. They'd never dream of anything amiss in this room. Lightning never strikes twice in the same place. Laura laughed with her. Charlie was getting desperate. He called and almost never spoke to Beth. When he did, she was brusque with him. He saw her at the Union, where she couldn't escape him, and she gave him only a few cursory minutes in public. He tried to pick her up after classes, and she ignored him or took refuge in the ladies' room. He was aching to explain, to talk, to hold her and to restore the love and logic to his world. Every time he saw her, he felt a frantic need to touch her, to force her to listen. Nothing was sensible any more. He stopped her in the hall at the Union one day and said, Beth, this has gone far enough. For God's sake, talk to me. She eyed him coolly. I have nothing to say to you, Charlie. Well, I've got something to say to you. She folded her arms patiently. All right, she said. Here? His voice was hard. This is as good as any place. He studied her for a minute in silence. Not quite, Beth, he said finally, and walked off and left her alone. It was the first time he had done it, and he caught Beth by surprise. She stared after him for a minute, and then went down the hall in the opposite direction. Charlie went off tormented and angry, wild with impatience and doubt, afraid he might never reach her, never touch her again, and the idea made him half mad. He went home to the empty apartment, poured himself a stiff drink, and threw himself into a chair. He fixed the wall with an angry stare while he finished the drink and poured another. And then he said to himself, Why? What the hell's wrong with the girl? And then he said it out loud, as if he expected an answer from the listening wall. What the hell is wrong with her? He stood up, glass in hand, and began to walk slowly up and down the room. I'll tell you what's wrong with her, he told himself aloud. She doesn't want to see you. He turned sharply around and demanded sarcastically, Does that mean there's something wrong with her? He emptied his glass and then glared balefully at the wall, filling the glass again. Be sensible, he admonished himself. Okay, we'll be sensible, he said. We'll be logical. We'll start with her family. Anything wrong there? No, she gets along fine with them. He fortified himself with a swallow. Now, he said, friends. First category, men. God, let's see, men. He sat down suddenly. Damn them, he murmured. God damn them all. When she had told him about the others, he had taken it in stride. He had been full of her, warm and passionate and wildly in love. He had her in his arms, and she had made a brave and painful confession to him. It had stunned him, but he rallied. It was easy to forgive her. She loved him. She needed him. She hated the others as much as he did. But now, thinking of them, with Beth remote and icy, with the same room they had made love in cold and lonely and haunted with Bud and Emily's sorrows as well as his own, he broke down, enraged. Oh, God, he snarled through closed teeth. Send every one of those stinking bastards straight to hell. His voice subsided to a whisper, and as for her, he drank a little more and then dropped his head in his hands. Make her love me, he said in a broken voice. Just make her love me. After a few minutes, he straightened up again and refilled his glass. Men, he said softly. I know she has no other men. I'd know that right away. Mary Lou would tell Mitch, and he'd sure tell me. He drank. It was becoming rather difficult to pursue the logical approach. He tried to retrace his steps. Family, he muttered. Friends, men, women. He laughed a little and lifted his glass and then put it down again on the table. He shook his head to clear it. God, how drunk am I, he said, looking at the glass and then at the bottle. After a long pause, he said it again, aloud but very quietly. Women? And then he took a long swallow. He stood up again and walked uncertainly around the room, pulling at his chin, rubbing his head, squinting with concentration. Finally he walked up to the wall and stopped, leaning against it. From months past came a hazy argument with Beth. He remembered gazing at her over the top of a diner table. He was saying, I can tell when a person has a crush on me. Can't you? Laura doesn't. Well, she does, Beth had said. She had said it several times, insisted on it. Charlie raised his clenched fists over his head, his whole body relying on the wall. Laura, he whispered, and the strength seemed to go out of him. He sagged against the wall. If I weren't so drunk, he told himself sternly. He slid slowly to the floor and fell asleep where he lay. While Charlie got drunk that afternoon, Beth began, for the first time, to have doubts about leaving school with Laura. When she got back to the sorority house that evening, she, quite unconsciously, gave herself away by saying to Laura, I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Beth, Laura exclaimed. She grasped Beth's hands and held them tight. Of course we are. What a thing to say. I guess so, but I don't know. As time goes by, I begin to wonder. Beth, don't you remember what you said? Don't you remember what they did to Emmy? What they'd do to us if we got caught? Beth, you promised me. Oh, darling, we were going to be so happy, all to ourselves with no house rules, no deans, no men to worry about. Beth! She pulled her hands up and pressed them to her lips, and Beth watched her with a warm feeling in her chest. Laura looked up. Beth, you promised. You said whatever happens. I said it too. It's like an oath. You can't break it. Oh, Beth, my love. She threw her arms around her. Yes, Beth whispered. Yes. Oh, Laura, I don't know. I'm crazy. Don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm saying. Then we will go? Yes, we'll go. But if she could calm Laura, she couldn't do as well by herself. Laura could believe in Beth and lean on her, depend on her for everything. But Beth had no one to look to, and she was suddenly responsible, not just for herself, but for Laura as well. It was unnerving. She hadn't expected Laura to take to her idea with such enthusiasm, to take so seriously and so finally what began in Beth's mind as a private emotional revolt. The thing seemed somehow foolhardy and stupid, and yet, when she looked into Laura's face and saw the endless warm love in it, all hers, Her reservations faded away. Laura said, "Beth, when will we go? Let's go soon." She knew if they postponed the thing much longer, Beth wouldn't go at all. The main thing was to get Beth out of Champlain before she changed her mind. And Laura had a sure idea that Charlie was behind Beth's doubt. "Did you see Charlie today?" she asked. Beth looked surprised. "Yes," she said. Laura stroked Beth's cheek with her finger. "He always upsets you, Beth," she said. Beth kissed the finger. "He reminds me of things I'd rather forget. Laura, you're adorable." Laura smiled gratefully at her. "When shall we go?" she said, capitalizing on Beth's mood. "Oh, Beth, tell me." "Oh, I don't know. When do you want to go? Your eyes are such a pretty blue. Where'd you get such blue eyes, Laura?" "Let's go Friday." "This Friday?" "Yes." She watched her hopefully, with parted lips. Beth kissed them. "Isn't that kind of soon?" "We have to, Beth. It's now or never," she added truthfully. Beth kissed the corner of Laura's mouth. "Is it?" she murmured. "Yes." "Beth, answer me. Kiss me." Beth's eyes were bright, teasing. Laura obeyed her. "Now answer me," she demanded. "Answer you what?" Laura smiled. "Say yes, Beth. Say yes, darling." "Yes, what?" "Just yes. Never mind what. Say it." She kissed her hard. "Yes," Beth whispered, smiling. "Yes, yes, yes." That was Monday night. Laura spent the next few days worrying about Charlie. She was afraid of any further contact between Charlie and Beth, though it seemed inevitable, the way Charlie was trying to see her. She wanted to prevent him from talking to Beth before he could do any real damage, before Friday came and Beth was safely on the train. But she didn't know what to do about it, how to go about it. Unexpectedly, Charlie solved her problem before the week was out. Chapter 19. Beth and Laura told their friends simply that they were going home for the weekend, a normal thing, especially in spring, for most of the girls to do. By Thursday afternoon, Laura was irrepressibly happy. Her only difficulty lay in trying to keep her excitement from showing. It was wonderful to escape from classes and campus and meetings and people, into her room in Beth's arms. Wonderful to free her feelings and see how strong and deep and solid they were. Best of all, to know that after tomorrow, Beth would be hers, irrevocably committed. Beth, as the time grew closer, began to worry in earnest, but Laura's drive and devotion seemed to pull her inexorably toward the train on Friday. She was sure she loved Laura, but not so sure she didn't love Charlie. She wavered, she wondered, she weighed 1,000 things in her mind. Freedom against her college degree, a tormented conscience against the sweet warmth of Laura, and all the countless little details that trailed in the wake of either decision. She tried to keep her mental seesawing from Laura. It would only hurt and confuse her. She felt that Laura had to be protected like a child. She had failed to see that every time she treated Laura to a little adult honesty, Laura responded like an adult. She didn't want to see. Laura was her baby. By Thursday, Beth had an almost oriental fatalism about leaving for New York. There was nothing she could do to stem the tide of Laura's enthusiasm. No way she had any control over the situation anymore. That afternoon, Laura went over to Campus Town after class to get some last-minute supplies. She walked into the university drugstore and got some toothpaste, one for Beth, she was always running out, and some emery boards. She was standing at the counter waiting for her change when she heard Charlie next to her say, "Hello, Laura." She looked up with a start. "Hi, Charlie," she said. He smiled down at her while she faltered, a little confused. She had the distinct feeling that he had followed her. "Your change, miss?" said the clerk, dangling a bored hand over the counter. "Oh, thank you." Laura took it, and Charlie simultaneously pulled her books out of her arms and held them while she put the money in her wallet. She stuffed the money away and reached quickly for her books, but he held them out of reach. "Let me take you home, Laura," he said, steering her toward the door. She didn't like the tone of his voice. "My car's just a block away." Laura protested. She didn't want anything from Charlie Ayres, not even a ride home. "Oh, please don't bother," she said. "No bother." She understood then that he intended to take her home, no matter what she said. He had made up his mind, and she resented his easy authority. It made her apprehensive. She walked along beside him in nettled silence, dragging and wishing she could give a hard shake to get his hand off her arm. They reached the car, and he held the door for her while she hesitated. "Get in," he said pleasantly, and when still she hung back, he smiled and said, "I'm not going to attack you, Laura." Laura blushed angrily and got into the front seat. He watched her with a curious smile, and then came around and got in and started the car. "I thought maybe you'd answer a couple of questions for me," he said. "In return for the ride?" she said. He must have been following me, she told herself. He laughed. "No," he said, "in return for the sympathy. You cried on my shoulder last fall, Laura. Now I'm going to cry on yours. Figuratively," he added, when she gave him a cold stare. They pulled away from the curb. "Well," she said, "I don't know if I can answer any questions, Charlie." "I think you can," he said. "I hope you will." He paused and then looked at her out of the corner of his eye, amused to see that she was staring spitefully at his long legs. She looked up hastily, sensing his gaze. Of course, you're under no obligation," he said. "Oh, no." She looked down at her hands, knowing it would be about Beth, and tempted to fear Charlie again. He was impressive competition. She had almost forgotten the lines of him. But tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow. And thinking of Beth and of the things she did and said and the way she looked, Laura felt a flush of strength and certainty. Beth loved her. You can't be in love with two people at once, and Beth loved Laura. She said so, and she meant it. Laura was sure. She looked up at Charlie again. He was lighting a cigarette. "I want to know," he said, taking it out of his mouth and spewing smoke over the dashboard, "why Beth won't see me." "Well," Laura shrugged, "she's been terribly upset." "So have I." "Well, Charlie, I don't know. Emily was her best friend." "Does her best friend mean more to her than the man she's in love with?" Laura turned surprised eyes on him, and then she laughed in spite of herself. He gave her a quick, inquisitive glance. "What's so funny?" he said. "She's not in love with you, Charlie." "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to laugh. You just surprised me." It was glorious to talk to him like this. "The hell she isn't," he said. "She's mad, she's insulted, yes. Maybe she hates me. I don't know. But I do know she's in love with me." Laura smiled at his certainty, suddenly enjoying her ride. "What's so damn funny, Laura?" he said. "Nothing," she said, but it was too tempting. "Your egoism, Charlie." "My egoism?" He smiled a little, suddenly cautious, wondering at Laura's change of mood. "Charlie," she said solicitously, with the thought of Beth in bed the night before, of Beth's kiss in the morning, of Beth's arms around her that afternoon. "Charlie, I didn't mean to be rude, really. I'm sorry. I know you think a lot of Beth." "I love Beth, Laura." Laura smiled into her lap again. Charlie watched her and then pulled the car up. He had been taking the long way back to Alpha Beta. They were at the edge of the university's experimental farm on the south campus. Charlie switched the ignition off and turned in his seat to study Laura. She glanced out the window and then questioningly at Charlie. "I want to know what's so damn funny about my being in love with Beth, or Beth with me." He looked straight at her. Laura fought her smile down. "Nothing, Charlie. It isn't funny. It was wrong of me. I'm sorry." He said nothing. "I think we'd better get back to the house," she said. "We will, when you explained the joke. She couldn't feel any alarm, somehow. She just felt delightfully secure, smug as only a successful rival can feel in the presence of the loser. She looked out the window again at the adventuring green of mid-April. "There's no joke, Charlie," she said. "Then what are you laughing at?" "I'm not. I don't know." She ached to tell him. Half the joy of a victory is the look on the face of defeat. "Look, Laura," he said, leaning toward her. "I thought we were friends, you and I. Maybe I was wrong." He watched her narrowly. "No." She shook her head slowly, letting him work for every word from her. "Well, then will you clear up the mystery for me? What's the matter with Beth? Or me, for that matter?" "Nothing's the matter with you, or her." Charlie lighted another cigarette from the last leg of the old one. "What's the matter, Laura? Why don't you want to tell me?" She frustrated him, made him feel hoodwinked. He had never thought a transparent girl like Laura could be so enigmatic. "What's all this about my being egotistical?" He watched her. No response, except a little maddening smile. He put his arm over the back of the seat and leaned toward her. "Come on, Laura, deflate my ego," he said cannily. "It seems to be the only way I'll learn anything." Laura laughed again. "I don't want to deflate your ego, Charlie." "Come on, Laura," he insisted. "Don't I have a right to know?" "Well," said Laura, savoring each word, "it's just that Beth isn't in love with you, Charlie. She was never in love with you." She gave him a sympathetic look. "That's all. I'm sorry." He knew better. "Yes, she is," he said. Laura shook her head with a smile. "How do you know she isn't?" he said. She looked at her lap, and finally Charlie set forward and knocked some ashes out the window and said some words he had only thought of once before, vaguely, when he was very drunk. "She's in love with you, I suppose," he said, with a taste of sarcasm in his voice. Laura looked up at him and smiled. It was intoxicating. Charlie gazed thoughtfully out the windshield, waiting for her denial, not taking his own words seriously until the silence forced him to review them. And suddenly, with painful lucidity, the light came. The sense and the reasons fell definitely into place. Laura watched him minutely, saw the tiniest line between his eyes grow and deepen, saw the hand with the cigarette start for his lips and drop slowly back to the steering wheel, saw his lips part a little and his eyes widen. And then he turned and stared at her, and she looked full into his face and smiled. He stared, and all Beth's little mysteries and refusals and anxieties and half-finished sentences smiled back at him. Laura never said a word. She just smiled serenely at him. Charlie shut his eyes for a moment, wishing he were stone drunk, and then looked unwillingly at her again, and then at the floor. Laura watched him hungrily, remembering every second, every detail of him, every sound. Finally he said in a husky voice, "Laura, is it true? Is it possible?" He looked at her. "Beth?" Laura didn't answer him. Her lips parted a little as if she meant to, but she didn't. Then she succumbed to temptation. "Is what true?" she said softly. "Is Beth? Is she—" It was hard for him to say, and Laura enjoyed his difficulty. She felt like patting his arm and saying the question for him, and then answering it lightly as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Charlie breathed deep. "Is Beth in love with you, Laura?" Laura looked down for a moment, and her smile widened, and then her eyes came up slowly to his face. Charlie took her shoulders and shook her. "Answer me," he commanded. "Answer me, Laura. Is she—" Her shoulders hurt from the grip of his hard hands, and she saw the ripple of movement in his cheeks as his jaw clenched. Laura let her head fall back a little, and she smiled gently at him and said, very slowly and luxuriously, "Yes." They gazed at each other for what seemed a very long time, a torturous time for Charlie and an exultant one for Laura. and then he let her go suddenly and turned back to the wheel and put his arms across it with his head down in his arms. Laura hoped he would cry. For a few minutes they sat in utter silence, with only April noises to disturb them. Laura put her head back on the seat and gloated over the handsome, broad-shouldered boy beside her, thinking how charming he was, how pleasant, how cocksure. She let herself feel sorry for him, and her pity threatened to exhilarate her uncontrollably. This was her irresistible rival, a desirable man, and Laura, a plain girl, had vanquished him. She smiled again. At length Charlie straightened up. "I could never have believed it," he said quietly. "I thought of everything, but some things you just don't believe." He started the car without looking at her, without saying anything more. They pulled back into the road and headed for the sorority house. Laura watched him, but his face was set and blank. Not the least tremor, not the palest line betrayed the tumult inside him. She said nothing, respecting his unuttered wish for silence. 5 minutes later, they pulled up in front of the house. Charlie stopped the car and turned to look at her. She gathered up her books and opened the door, and then she looked back at him. She couldn't help herself. "Thanks for the ride," she said. "You're welcome," he answered. His voice was deep and quiet. She admired his control. She got out and went up the walk to the front door and opened it and went into the house, knowing that he was sitting in the car watching her, never moving. When she was inside, she rushed up the stairs to the first landing and pushed the heavy drapes carefully aside to peek out and see him start the car up and move down the street. He was driving in the direction of Maxie's. "He's going to get drunk," Laura thought jubilantly. "He's going to get drunk because he can't take it." Charlie's first thought was go to Maxie's and drink himself insensible, but he dismissed the idea almost as soon as it came to him. This time he needed a clear mind, uncluttered with alcoholic confusion. He turned the car around and drove slowly in the opposite direction. He was thinking, concentrating intensely in an effort to keep his emotions at bay. A clear mind, he thought over and over. It occurred to him to go to the library. He hadn't any specific idea why. The library was a temple of learning, of wisdom. He would go there and soak it up. He would find a good, sensible book and discover what made Beth and Laura want each other. He would understand. But he no sooner parked his car by the library and started walking toward the big building than he knew how futile it was. He would be unable to read a single line of print. He paused uncertainly on the steps, looking into the great dark hall beyond the doors, and then he turned around. He didn't know what to do. He sat down finally in the shade of a statue and leaned against the base. Above him drooped a lush woman in rough stone, rich with female curves. Some feet away a sister statue straddled her pedestal with muscular thighs. Charlie glared at the two women of rock, so warmly shaped that he never passed them without wanting to reach out and touch them. He knew them today for their cold, hard, unknowable selves. For a long time he sat on the library steps between the stone sisters, and after a while it became possible to think. Just a little at first. It was one thing to reconcile himself to Beth's mistakes of the past, mistakes that were over and done with, mistakes that were above all normal, but it was quite another to accept her strange transgression with Laura. Charlie thought back over the year. He knew he had satisfied Beth. He knew she wanted him. He had not been putting up a front when he told Laura that Beth loved him. Beth did love him. That could only mean one thing, that her feelings for Laura were not true love, not the kind of love she had for him. He began to breathe a little more freely. Beth was an iconoclast. He knew that. She was an experimenter, and her failures, her frigidity with men might have pushed her to make this most extraordinary experiment of all, to look for release with a woman. Coming at it from that angle, it wasn't quite so shocking, and it gave him hope. If Laura were an experiment for Beth, she wasn't a permanent thing. She represented a phase Beth had to go through. Charlie smacked his fist into his palm. He stood up and slapped the nearest stone woman on the rump. He had made up his mind. Beth needed someone to guide her, to talk to her and straighten her out. She needed someone to love with real love. He would see to it that she got it. Chapter 20. Beth was pensive that evening, but Laura was so gay that she had trouble concentrating on her misgivings. Laura was learning from her how to tease, and she could rouse and delight Beth very skillfully now. She rarely missed an opportunity to do it. Beth sat on the couch with a book in her hands, and Laura came up to her and pulled it out. "What's that?" she said, glancing at it as she sat beside Beth. "James." "What's it for?" "Class tomorrow." "Class doesn't matter anymore," Laura said. "Nothing matters anymore but you and me. You have to study me now, Beth." Beth laughed and caressed her, but her doubts grew stronger nevertheless. She might have revolted against the plan, begged Laura to wait till the school year was up, if a letter hadn't come the next day from Emmy. There had been several. Beth answered them all, and they had been brave and hopeful, but this one was forsaken and bitter for the first time. Emmy hadn't seen Bud for 2 weeks. Her parents were needling her. She couldn't find a job. She said, "Beth, whatever happens, don't ever let yourself get into a mess like this, ever. Everybody knows what happened. It's so hard to face them all. I'd always thought men would give you a fair shake if you were honest with them. But now I'm beginning to wonder. I haven't heard from Bud for 2 weeks. Not a word. And I've written every day. I'd call, but I'm afraid I'd embarrass him, make him mad or something." "Make Bud mad? What's Bud done to deserve any consideration?" "Besides, I have some unwelcome news for him. He may have to marry me, whether he wants to or not." Beth crumpled the letter harshly in her hand, too angry and vengeful even for tears. Laura came into the room, back from her last class. She was breathless and happy, and she threw her arms around Beth and said, "Oh, Beth, I can't wait." Beth hugged her. She felt good. The weather was good. The idea was good. The time was right. Emmy was right. There was no good in men. They planned to meet at the station at 4:30. The train pulled out at 5:15. They'd have time for a sandwich, plenty of time to get good seats. A lot of trunks went home in April full of winter clothes. Theirs had left with a bunch of others unnoticed. Beth simply left most of the room furnishings. They were hers and she didn't care about them. "I'm rich, Laura," she said gaily. "I'm 21 and I've got my own money now, and no one can take it away from me, not even Uncle John. I'm free, and it was wonderful." Beth had an afternoon class, and as Laura didn't, they planned to go down to the station separately and meet there. Beth got out of her last class at 3 and headed for the Union. Her conscience troubled her. She was leaving a big job in a big mess. She went up to her office and tried to straighten things out. "Leaving us?" someone called out, eyeing her little traveling bag. She was startled for a minute. "No," she said. "I mean, home for the weekend." "Lucky girl. Wish I could take a weekend off." She laughed nervously and went to work. It was after 4 when she stopped. She tidied up her desk with an unsettling sense of finality, pulled her jacket on, took her bag firmly by the handle, and walked out of her office, through the student activities room, and into the spacious hall, heading for the elevator. Charlie stood up from a bench by the stairwell. "I've been waiting for you," he said. She stood frozen for a minute, and then she started briskly for the elevator. "I haven't got time, Charlie." "Well, make time," he said. He caught her arms and took her bag from her. "Going someplace?" "Yes, let me go." "Not this time, Beth. Where are you going?" "That's none of your business." "All right," he said. An elevator stopped and the doors opened and people spilled out. I'm going to talk to you, Beth, whether you like it or not, Charlie said. People looked at them curiously. I'm going to talk to you right here and now in front of anybody and everybody, unless you'd care to give me a little privacy. Charlie, don't be a fool, she said sharply. Give me my bag. Beth, there's something I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. People stopped and watched them. All right, Charlie, she said in a brittle voice. She went to the door of a conference room, looked in, and found it empty. We can use this, she said, but make it snappy. He followed her in, shutting the door behind him. Beth, where are you going? He said seriously, indicating the bag. Beth sighed impatiently. I'm going home for the weekend, with Laura, on the 5:15. She looked significantly at her watch. Charlie looked at her in alarm, suddenly alerted. With Laura? He said. Beth turned her back on him. Yes, with Laura. Now, what is it you're so anxious to tell me? Charlie knew he might lose her, then, really lose her. The bag looked ominous, sitting quietly on the long, polished conference table. He leaned against the wall, watching Beth pace up the other side of the table, wondering if he could flesh the truth out of her with a scare. Why don't you take her to New York? He said. Beth stood absolutely still. The click of her heels died abruptly, and she was tense as a guy wire, motionless. He hit home. Her back told him so. Finally she turned and looked at him. What do you mean? She said, and her voice was very soft. He straightened up. If you're in love with her, go live with her. His eyes were relentless. Beth gazed at him with a stricken frown on her face, and suddenly she hurried toward the door. Charlie stepped in front of it, and she stopped, unwilling to touch him. She turned her back to him again. Is that all you have to say to me, Charlie? No, he said. Do you love her, Beth? What are you trying to prove, Charlie? What are you trying to hide, Beth? Nothing, she flared. Then be honest with me. Do you love her? She paused, looking anxiously for an answer. What makes you think I love her? Answer me, damn it, he said. She said, in a haggard, scarcely audible voice, I don't know. And then she turned angry eyes on him. How did you know? I figured it out. Look, Beth, all I want is a chance to talk to you. I'm not going to strong-arm you into anything. I'm not going to beat you over the head. You ought to know that by this time. I didn't expect to find you running away, but I'm not running away. Damn it, Charlie, I'm running into more problems than I'm running away from. I'm not a coward. Listen to me, Beth, he said. And his eyes were intense and his voice was soft. Just listen to me for a minute. And remember, no matter what I say, no matter what you feel, I love you. That silenced her. For a minute he regarded her quietly, and then he said, Grow up, Beth. I don't know how much there is to this thing between you and Laura, honey, but it's all off balance. I'll tell you that. It's cockeyed because Laura's in love with you and you aren't in love with Laura. I am. A minute ago you didn't know. Her eyes fell and she rubbed them in confusion. And what's more, he went on in his firm voice, she doesn't know you're in love with me. She doesn't know you ever were. I'm not. He ignored her. This is child stuff, Beth, this thing between you and Laura. You're deceiving yourself, denying yourself. You're a woman, honey, a grown woman, an intelligent, beautiful girl with a good life ahead of you. And that life has a man in it and kids and a college degree. Maybe it can't be that way for Laura, but it's got to be that way for you. I want something more than that. Her voice was contemptuous. Then you'll find it, but not by running away, and certainly not by running away with a girl, and a girl you don't love at that. Charlie, damn it, you can't run away, Beth. His voice, his gestures were urgent. My God, you've read the books. What do they all say? Every damn one. They say running away won't help. It won't solve the problem. You can't run away from the problem. You have to stand pat and face it. Look, darling, he said, you aren't in love with Laura. Laura's in love with you, yes, but my God, don't you see what you're doing? You're using her as an excuse. You're sorry for her. You want to take care of her as if she were a little girl without thinking what harm that's doing her. You're sorry for Emmy. You're sorry for yourself. You're mad at the whole goddamned world and me in particular because there are rules that you don't like, and when somebody breaks the rules, somebody gets hurt. Don't you see how young that is? It's kid stuff, honey. That's the kind of thing you did back in grade school when the world was a big mystery and rules didn't seem to make any sense. You couldn't fight them. You couldn't make sense of them. So you either kicked and screamed or you ran away. Charlie, she whispered, and he could hear the tears in her voice. I can't hurt Laura. I can't hurt her. Not now. It's too late. Beth. He came up behind her and took her shoulders in his hands, bending his head down close to hers. Jesus, Beth, don't you see how much greater the harm would be if you let her go along, thinking you love her? Let her leave school and home and everything she knows for you, and then let her find out someday that you don't really love her, that you never loved her, that you've only been playing with her, using her for your own self-assurance, lying to her all along. Oh, Charlie, her shoulders trembled. You make it sound so terrible. It is terrible, darling, but it hasn't happened yet. He felt the first twinge of hope. He was right. She was frightened. The premise he had gambled on was true. She loved him, not Laura. It remained only to convince her of this herself. It would hurt her so awfully if I, not like it will hurt a few months from now, or a year. Then it could hurt so much that she'd never recover. Beth, my love. He put his arms around her. Running away now won't help Emmy either. It won't undo the wrong. It won't make Laura happy. And think what it's going to do to you. Face it, honey. Look ahead. Think, not just of Laura or Emmy or me, but of yourself. What will this do to your life, Beth? He said, turning her around and lifting her chin. She looked at him through welling tears. You don't need to be loved right now, my darling, he said, and she frowned in wonderment. You are, but that's not the point. You don't need to be loved one half so much as you need to love, Beth, and you need to love a man, and you do. They stared at each other for a long time while her tears slowed and stopped and his face came into focus and his strength held her fast and warmed and thrilled her. Charlie, she said. He kissed her wet cheeks and her lips for a long, lovely while, cradling her body against his own, letting her forget a little, find her courage and will again, pressed hard against the clean, friendly power of himself. And then he pushed her firmly away. Your train leaves in half an hour, he said. I'll drop you off at the station. He picked up her bag and led her out of the room. She followed him in confusion, her mind in an alarming uproar, her heart in knots. They left the Union and walked half a block to his car without saying anything. She got in and settled herself, trying at the same time to settle her frantic nerves. They drove to the station. He stopped at the corner, some distance from the entrance, in case Laura should be there waiting. Beth hesitated, her hand on the door handle. Charlie watched her. It's your decision, Beth, he said. She closed her eyes and clamped her teeth together and pushed the handle down. The door gave a little, and still she waited, agonized. It's 5 o'clock. Better get going, he said. Train leaves at 5:15. Charlie! She turned her tortured face to him. Charlie! I'm going over to Walgreens and get a cup of coffee, he said. I'll be there until 5:30. Slowly she got out of the car, pulling her bag after her. She gave him a long, supplicating look and then shut the car door and watched him drive off. He didn't look back. She turned and walked up the steps and along the station to the entrance and went in. Laura saw her instantly. Oh, Beth, she said thankfully. For a minute Oh, never mind. You're here. Thank God you're here. Beth tried to smile at her. Laura, she began. I got your ticket, darling. It got so late. What happened, Beth? Why are you so late? I got held up at the Union. Could she never tell the truth? Oh, Laura laughed. I nearly had heart failure. It got later and later and, well, anyway, you're here. We'd better go on up if we want seats. The train's loading. She gave a little tug at Beth's sleeve. Laura, wait. She stopped, unable to talk, hardly able to face Laura. With a forced, frightened calm, Laura took Beth's bag from her and led her to a wooden bench near the ticket windows. She made her sit down, and then she took her hands and said, with inexplicable dread, What is it, Beth? Far away inside her it was turning cold. Laura, Beth's cheeks were hot with a needling shame and uncertainty. "Beth, you've been crying. What's the matter?" "Oh, Laura." Beth couldn't find her tongue. Her voice was rough with sorrow. "Don't you want to go, darling?" Laura sounded unbelievably sad and soft and sweet. "Laura, couldn't we wait till June? Laura shook her head gravely. "No, we can't, Beth. We have to go now, or we'll never go. You know that." She did know it, but she couldn't come right out and admit it. "No, Laura, we could do it later, couldn't we?" For the first time she was asking Laura instead of telling her. Laura shook her head again and murmured, "No, Beth, tell me the truth. We haven't much time. What's the matter?" "Laura, darling, I just can't do it. I just can't. Oh, Laura, hate me, and she put her head down against the bench and wept, unable to look at Laura, pulling her hand free to cover her face. Laura held the other one hard. When Beth was quieter, she raised her eyes and saw Laura's face, white and heartbreakingly gentle. And there was a curious new strength in it, an almost awesome dignity that Beth, in her distress, lacked completely. "Laura, stay with me," she said a little wildly. "Stay here? We'll go back to the house. It's only another month or so. Please." "No," said Laura. "I have to go." She was cold all over now, but the frost brought clarity as well as suffering. She began to understand. She heard Beth start to implore her, and she stopped her. "Beth, I have only a few minutes. Listen to me. Tell me one thing. Only one. Do you love Charlie? Is that what's the matter?" Beth started to shake her head, but Laura said, "Don't try to protect me any more, Beth. I want to know the whole truth. Do you love him?" Beth was surprised and touched by her self-command, and she gazed at her a moment before answering, "Yes," in a whisper. "Then I'll go, and you'll stay." "No, listen to me." Beth was startled into silence. Laura's voice dropped. "Beth, I love you. I'm not like other people, like most people. I can never love more or better than I love you, only more wisely maybe, someday if I'm lucky. It can never be any other way for me. What I mean is, there can never be a man for me, Beth. I'll never love a man like I love you." Her voice nearly lost its steady softness. Her eyes never lost their deep hurt. Her hand never relaxed its tight constriction over Beth's. She talked fast, racing the clock. "It's different for you, Beth. I guess I've known all along, when you met Charlie and everything. I just wanted you so much, so terribly, so selfishly that I couldn't admit it. I couldn't believe it. But you need a man. You always did. Emmy was right. She understood. If I'd only listened. I was the one who was wrong, about you and her, but I'm not wrong about myself. Not any more. And not about you either. Oh, Laura, my dear, we haven't time for tears now, Beth. I've grown up emotionally as far as I can, but you can go farther. You can be better than that. And you must, Beth, if you can. I've no right to hold you back." Her heart shrank inside her at her own words. "Laura, I misjudged you so. I thought you were such a baby, We've both made mistakes, Beth. Can you forgive me? I've been so... You taught me what I am, Beth. I know now. I didn't before. I understand what I am, finally. It's not a question of forgiving. I'm grateful. I can face life, my family, everything now, knowing. That's terribly important. I couldn't before, don't you see?" She couldn't cry. There were no tears potent enough to relieve her grief. Her control was almost involuntary. "But I've deceived you so. It was just an accident, the whole thing, Beth." The train whistle blew. Laura drew near, her eyes profound and wise and wounded. Only 5 minutes left. "Don't you see what happened, Beth? We were in the same place at the same time, and we both needed affection, darling. If it hadn't been that way, I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have learned about myself. Maybe not for a long time. And then it could have been a brutal, terrifying lesson. You made it beautiful, Beth. I guess that's all loving ever is. Two people in the same place at the same time who need it. Only sometimes, for one, love has all the answers. For the other, it's just a game, a beautiful game. That's what happened to us, Beth. Neither of us willed it that way. It just happened. For you, it was an accident, a sort of lovely surprise, and you took it that way. You took me for the little girl you thought I was. It was that little girl you wanted, not me. I had to be that little girl to keep you. I should have faced it then, but I couldn't. I couldn't even think about it. You see, for me it was love, a revelation, a forever sort of thing, only nothing lasts forever. You told me that once. The whistle called again. Laura got up from the bench and walked swiftly toward the exit. Beth ran after her. "Oh, Laura, Laura, please don't go. Not like this. Please. I have to, Beth. You're running away." She followed her outside as Laura hurried toward the stairs up to the train platform. "No, I'm facing it," Laura said. "I know what I am, and I can be honest with myself now. I'll live my life as honestly as I can, without ruining it. I can't do that here, and I can't do it with you. That's over now." Beth listened to her words, feeling for the first time the maturity in them, knowing Laura was right and admiring her with a sudden force because Laura had the courage to say these things, these truths, and the strength to do what she knew was right. Beth rushed along beside her, holding her arm, knowing that when she released it, she would release Laura forever. She would never see her or touch her again, and yet knowing that it had to be that way. She would come to Charlie chastened with the knowledge Laura had given her. She would come to him wiser, older, and richer in love because of Laura. "Laura," she said, as they made their way down the platform, "I'm the one who's been acting like a baby, who's been childish about the whole thing. I never dreamed you were so brave." She couldn't think of a more fitting word. "Laura, I know I'm not making much sense, but you do mean so much to me, Laura, so very much. I want you to know you're not the only one who's learned and who's grateful." They reached the last car, and Laura turned to her. There was the shade of a smile on her face. The pain was awful, but the wound was clean. It would heal. "Beth, I'm not angry. I thought I'd be bitter. I thought I'd hate Charlie if this ever happened. I thought I'd hate you more than anyone else on earth. But I've thought about it a lot, when you were seeing him so much and so happy with him, and I was spending those long nights at home alone. Even now, when you were late getting to the station, I kind of imagined what it would be like. I knew it would hurt, but somehow I guess I always knew it would happen. It had to. You can't need men and spend the rest of your life with a girl. I knew you weren't queer like I am." The words slapped Beth cruelly in the face. "Laura," she protested, "I knew as well as you did that it wouldn't last, only I couldn't admit it because I love you." "Oh, Laura, darling," the conductor shouted. "All aboard?" Laura put her bag on the steps and took Beth's hands again. "Beth, you're meant for a man like Charlie. I'm not. I'm not afraid to go. I'm not sorry. It hurts, and I love you." Her eyes dropped, and she almost faltered. "I love you," she whispered, and Beth felt the pressure of her hands as the train gave a preliminary jerk. "Laura!" Beth cried, walking by the train, and Laura looked up again. "But I wouldn't have the strength to face it if I didn't." Beth reached for her and pulled her head down and kissed her. There on the train platform in the late afternoon sun, with the train inching away from her and all Champlain free to watch. "Laura, I love you," she said, letting Laura slide from her arms as the train pulled her away. And she meant it for the first time. She loved her, not as Laura would have wanted her to, but sincerely, honestly, the best love she could offer. She leaned exhausted against a post and watched the train pull out, and her eyes never left Laura's. She stood with quiet tears stinging her cheeks and watched till the train wound its way out of sight. Then she turned and walked slowly back down the steps and over to the station. She picked up her bag where Laura had left it and walked outside into the sunshine, set it down, and looked at her watch. There was a sudden flutter of new joy in her heart. She had to hurry. It was almost 5:30.